I'm proud to announce once again that we have successfully secured $300 million under the Border Water Infrastructure Program to aggressively address the cross-border pollution from the Tijuana River Valley. This historic achievement is an example of how Democrats and Republicans can work together to solve even the most challenging local and regional issues.
That deserves applause. Yeah.
I'm particularly grateful to my colleagues in Congress, Representatives Davis, Vargas, and Peters, for being here today. They've not only been mentors and friends, but also great partners in working together to solve the critical issues facing our region. The accomplishment we're here to discuss was also made possible by the work and persistence of Mayor Faulkner, Mayor Dedina, Supervisor Cox, and many others, including the Port of San Diego. Again, this was a truly bipartisan team effort for the good of the entire San Diego region. There are so many other leaders who have fought for action on this issue, including Mayor Mary Salas, Mayor Alejandra Sotelo Solis, Mayor Richard Bailey, Councilmember Vivian Moreno, Councilmember Paloma Aguirre, and others. Many of them are here, and I thank you for the many years you've put of hard work to address this issue. As we all know, runoff from the Tijuana River Valley has polluted our waters and left our constituents, our service members, and our Border Patrol agents with sickness, rashes, and even chemical burns. This has been an issue in our region for decades, and concrete federal action to address cross-border pollution has been long overdue. Several months ago, in fact, almost 6 months ago, in this very spot, we got together and we talked about legislation we were all working on, and we also saw an opening. We saw an opening through the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement, or USMCA, as the mechanism to finally deliver much-needed federal assistance. By working together across party lines, we negotiated a dramatic increase in funding for the Border Water Infrastructure Program, also known as the BWIP program, to $300 million through the USMCA. Let me put that amount into some perspective. In past appropriations, the BWIP program has received as little as $15 million a year to provide border water infrastructure to the entire U.S.-Mexico border. And believe it or not, in the President's fiscal year 2020 budget, no money was included for the BWIP program. Since being elected to Congress, I've been advocating for greatly increased BWIP funding as the best means to address Tijuana River Valley pollution. This past summer, when we came together 6 months ago, I introduced, as part of a package of bills from our delegation, the Border Water Infrastructure Improvement Act, which proposed a dramatic increase in funding for BWIP, and specifically called for more funding for EPA Region 9, which includes the Tijuana River Valley. I'm thrilled that the final USMCA language, which was signed into law this past Wednesday by the President, closely mirrors the legislation that I introduced to increase BWIP funding. Well, securing this funding was a historic accomplishment. Our work is far from over. We must now make sure that the $300 million in USMCA gets to our region without delay, and also that Mexico makes robust investments on their side of the border to further mitigate pollution flowing into the region. I look forward to working with my colleagues here, as well as other local, state, and federal officials until this issue is finally solved. And with that, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Representative Susan Davis.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you here. This is a replay, and it's a very important one. Thank you for coming out. As I've always said, and I think so many of us here in San Diego acknowledge that we cannot really be a true America's finest city if our beaches are closed far too often. So this is a very promising day for our community, and we are a step closer to making beach closures a thing of the past. Our congressional delegation and local leaders have been working for years to try to stem the flow of sewage at the border, and we know it's not an easy problem. It's not an easy problem to solve, but the recent trade deal as Congressman Levin has spoken to, gave us a new opportunity to address the issue. Through the USMCA, Congress secured a significant investment to stem the tide of sewage flowing into our rivers and our oceans. And while the $300 million will go towards environmental infrastructure improvements on the U.S. side, the USMCA also contains $15 million for the North American Development Bank. And the NAD Bank is, as we all know, and you all have worked hard on this, provides investments to develop and finance environmental infrastructure projects on both sides of the border. But we know it's not enough to mitigate the problem. On our side, we of course have to be working with Mexican government so that the badly needed improvements can be made. It's never been a one-sided issue. We have also been looking to the Navy to join us in this fight. Our community has been living with this problem for years, and I think we all agree that the Navy is such an important part of our community. We know about the health concerns that beachgoers, that lifeguards, and Border Patrol agents face from exposure to pollution. But our Navy personnel, and especially our SEALs, risk training in contaminated waters, and the Navy can be forced to cancel training operations to avoid exposure to Navy personnel. So our SEALs train so that when we need them, they are ready, that they can deliver. And if that's the case, then we should be able to deliver clean training areas for them. In recent discussions our office has had with the Navy, we are seeing progress in partnering more robustly. And we need to do that. Hasn't been on the highest priority for them, but it's a really high priority for all of us. And as you can see from the distinguished group gathered here today, our congressional delegation and local leaders are committed to finding a solution. So I want to thank my House colleagues, but I also want to recognize our local leaders and the advocates, because we are going to keep working together. Your leadership has been invaluable on this issue. But the work, as we all will say, the work is just not done, a beginning, but with this investment, we have made significant progress toward making the most of our beaches and our waters. And now I want to thank and introduce Congressman Juan Vargas, who represents this beautiful Bayside Park, for his strong advocacy on the issue at the local, the state, and now the federal level. Juan.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. My wonderful staff gave me 10 pages of notes here to read, and I apologize, but I'm not going to do that. I do want to say this. I want to thank everyone that's here, especially Representative Levin. He was like a pit bull on this issue. When USMCA came up, he was saying how great it was for San Diego and for my district, and I said, yeah, it's been beneficial, but it's also been problematic. And the reason for that is there's been a lot of externalities with NAFTA, and that is the sewage that's flown across the river now and into our beaches for a long time. And I know that Scott Peters, who represents Coronado, has had this issue for a long time too. And I said, we have to have relief. We have to have money. He said, well, what if we put $300 million in there? I said, well, put $300 million in, I'll vote for it, of course. Let's need the money. And he was like a pit bull. He's like a dog with a bone. He grabbed onto that thing and he made sure that that money was in there, and I was happy to vote for it after that happened. But that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for everyone here. I also noticed that the Chamber of Commerce is here, the Greater Chamber of Commerce. They've come back to D.C. numerous times on this particular issue and talked to the administrations and others to make sure it happened, and I appreciate that very, very much. And of course, Serge Dedina that is here and has been like a pit bull on the water there. He's been fantastic. Appreciate that. And again, that $300 million was very, very important. But now it's very important for us to keep on top of the EPA to make sure they spend it correctly in here. And that's going to be all up to all of us. The money's there. Now we have to make sure they spend it and they spend it correctly. Also, with respect to the NAD Bank, the North American Development Bank, was created under NAFTA, and it was supposed to go to projects along the border that would help with these environmental issues. Now, it hasn't done a very good job when it comes to wastewater. So we did, in fact, change the law to address more of the wastewater. So there's going to be a lot of money in there also. There's going to be $1.5 billion that the American government puts in and $1.5 billion that the Mexican government puts in. And again, we have to be very aggressive as a community to make sure that that money gets spent here to cure these problems. And I know that we can do that. So again, I want to thank everyone that's here. I want to thank Senator Feinstein and Harris. Of course, they were magnificent to work with. They always are. And I want to thank all of the activists that have kept this on the forefront. You haven't let it go. Thank God for you guys. And we all have to be a little bit like Mike Levin, with a dog with a bone. Just grab onto this thing and make sure we don't let go until we cure this problem. And you know what? There's still a lot of work ahead, and that's why I appreciate everybody here. Let's keep working together. It's been a great project to work, Democrats, Republicans, all of us as San Diego County people. And I have the great honor now of introducing my good friend, Scott Peters.
Thank you. Thanks, Juan. Thank you very much. And I would want to say, too, a couple things about the agreement itself and the great effect on the economy here. NAFTA took effect in 1994 between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. It's increased trade exponentially. Combined, the two nations account for over 30% of all foreign trade and $1 trillion in goods and services imported and exported to the United States. 100,000 jobs rely on that trade in San Diego alone, 110,000, a $2.5 billion supply chain. This is the next step in that partnership, and it provides protections for businesses no one could have ever imagined even existed 16 years ago, or 26 years ago. More worker protections in Mexico, a better enforcement of environmental laws in Mexico and Canada, and new standards for intellectual property like copyrights, trademarks, and patents. And a lot of the people here worked to make sure that this was a better agreement than the ones we've had in the past. And I hope that those practices carry on in the future and that we can expand those agreements to other countries around the world. But you know what happened then? We had an opportunity as this came up to say, while we're dealing with Mexico, we've got a really big problem at the border, and that needs to be solved. 20 years ago, Mexico and the U.S. jointly funded the International Wastewater Treatment Plant at the border in San Diego. And that improved the situation for a while, but the city of Tijuana has grown extremely rapidly, adding almost 80,000 residents per year. It now has a population of about 2 million people, and its wastewater facilities aren't keeping up. An average storm can result in overflows directly to the Tijuana River, dragging trash, sediment, and sewage into the United States, causing San Diego beaches all the way from the southern border to Coronado Island to be closed constantly due to dangerous levels of pollution. In February 2017, we experienced the largest spill we've seen in decades. In a matter of days, a ruptured pipe in Tijuana sent as much as 1 million gallons of sewage into the Pacific Ocean. It heavily polluted 25 miles of coastline, and this is an ongoing problem. According to the International Boundary and Water Commission, from 2014 to now, more than 57 billion gallons of sewage have spilled across the border. Recently, the results of the Tijuana River Diversion Study were released, the outcome of comprehensive research conducted by agencies from both our countries about what to do. What do we do? I'd ask you to take a look at that report, because people ask, what are we going to spend the money on? This is a real blueprint, and I have to give credit to the local electeds, particularly Mayor Dedina and Supervisor Cox, and the city councils of Coronado and Imperial Beach for really pushing this so that we're ready. In short, it found that the best and cheapest way to fix the problem is at the source. As Mike said, building new capture and treatment facilities in Tijuana, and we need Mexico's help, and we expect it, and we will demand it. In 1994, Mexico's National Water Commission, the NAD Bank, and the Border Environment Cooperation Commission were created to build projects to mitigate environmental harm that would result from the increased economic activity NAFTA would bring to the border region. Initial capitalization from both the United States and Mexico at that time has funded many projects in both countries since. And in fact, in Texas has dealt with problems that were similar to ours, big problems, that now are much smaller problems. And that's what we want now on our side of the border here in California. So in July, my colleagues from San Diego, as was said, came out here to propose a package of legislation that would increase funds to the BWIP program, which has provided grants. We proposed a $225 million increase to NAD Bank, which could be capitalized up to $1.5 billion. And I proposed the creation of a trust fund at the bank where Congress could house up to $400 million specifically for projects here to address wastewater and pollution. So now we have $300 million directed toward cross-border pollution, and water contamination crisis will only end with reliable funding dedicated to that issue. With the signing of USMCA, the U.S. and Mexico have committed to clean up this river valley with these massive funding investments, and this is a significant victory for our region, for the military, I think, and the Border Patrol, as Susan Davis said, for our economies and for the environment. We know that the binational region works and succeeds when we work together, but we have a lot of work left to do, and you have my commitment from my office, and I think from the whole team up here, that we'll continue to make sure we've made a big step. Now we've got to make sure that we get this money deployed correctly and this problem solved, and that's what we're all about. That's what we're here to do, and I know together we can solve this problem. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce an invaluable partner in this effort. I know you may have noticed that the President only invited Republicans to the signing ceremony, which is kind of a little bit petty since a lot of us have been working on trade for a long time, but that's why it's important to have Republicans on your side in this administration. And one of the very important ones who's been out in Washington and been engaged is Mayor Kevin Faulconer. Mayor Faulconer, thanks.
Thanks, Scott. Well, good morning. Good morning to all of you. It is great to be here because this was a true bipartisan effort. And look at all of the folks that are here today. This represents the best of what we do as a region when we work together. Make no mistake, the signing of this agreement, the dollars are going to flow to clean up the sewage spills from the Tijuana River Valley once and for all is a shining example of what we can do when we work together and let our local voices be heard, not only in the halls of Washington, D.C. at the Capitol, but in the halls of Mexico City. And when I think back to over the last several years, particularly in the last 7 months, it was everyone that you see here that was not going to take no for an answer. We knew the timing was coming together, and we knew what we had to do for the region. And so, as I said, this is not only a real victory for our nation in terms of free trade and our economy, but it's a particular victory for us here in the San Diego region. I was indeed, in fact, honored to attend the official signing ceremony just a couple of days ago, and to see so many of our Mexican partners, our Canadian partners, and the people that understand how important this agreement is and understand how active San Diego was in pushing this agreement across the finish line. This was the region that I'm a little biased, but I think absolutely pushed the hardest in Washington, D.C. to get this agreement signed. And for years, our local leaders have been pushing hard on the federal level, and we understand, as the mega region that we are, the Cali Baja region, that free trade works. And as we said, if we're not letting our voices be heard locally, nobody's going to tell our story of success in the border region for us. This was our opportunity to tell that story. And we know the cross-manufacturing supply chains that we have. We know our trade partners. Number one trading partner, Mexico. Number two trading partner, Canada. And so to get this agreement signed, to get it modernized, to get the environmental protections that we have, again, is something that all of us are very, very proud of. The Tijuana River Valley problem, as many of my colleagues have just said, has been around with us literally for generations. We can be the generation that finally cleans it up. And that's the significance of this agreement and this funding. And I can't say enough about everybody who was here, again, at the podium today. Our local leaders, Congressman was talking about a dog with a bone. You want to talk about tenacity, and the person who's been doing it quietly and pushing, Supervisor Cox, Greg, thank you for your years of support to get us to the point that we were. It was incredibly important to us to have the EPA, to us to have the idea of where we were going to do this. And as I said before, with our local leaders and to work with our congressional tenacity members, it all came together. I want to thank Mayor Bailey. I want to thank Mayor Dedina, who I'm going to introduce in a second. But I also want to get back to the delegation. Congressman Levin, Congresswoman Davis, Scott Peters, Juan Vargas. You will not find anybody that worked harder to get this across the finish line for our region. And as I said before, it represents the best of what our region can do when we work together. This was never about partisanship. This was about what's the right thing to do for San Diego, and everybody really stepped up. I particularly want to thank Senator Feinstein as well. I know members of her staff are here today. They were absolutely key and instrumental in putting this final agreement together, and I thank you for that. All of our members of the Port of San Diego as well, who stood up, talked about the importance of water quality, talked about the economy, talked about the environment. If you've sensed a theme here, it's that we know how to work together. That's a strength. We should take this momentum, and what's the next issue, guys? I mean, it's like, let's nobody can stop us when we work together. Housing, there you go. And so I will conclude, and just to say again that this is a great day for our region. Thank you to everybody behind me. Thank you for doing the right thing for San Diego. And again, back to tenacity. My fellow mayor and colleague, Mayor Serge Dedina, as I said, who really helped put a face on this as well from an environmental perspective, from the local perspective. Another person who never took no for an answer, who kept pushing for all of the right reasons. Please welcome Mayor Serge Dedina of Imperial Beach. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, sir.
So one of the most important things is I want to spend my morning surfing the north side of the Tijuana River mouth with a pod of dolphins. And I think, Juan, it's not like a dog with a bone. It's like we have the largest pod of dolphins just, from Coronado to IB in San Diego County. And they're tenacious, but strategic. They're collegial. They're friendly, but man, they work together to hunt their prey. So, and then when they're done, they surf. I actually surf with them. So we're going to get this done, and then we're all going to hang out at the beach together. But no, really, I've been lucky to have been behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. I want to thank our congressional delegation, Juan Vargas, Scott Peters, Mike Levin, Susan Davis. I know the work that they've done. I know how tenacious they have all been, but how they've worked across the aisle. They've worked with the White House, and they really focused on getting this done. So we're really grateful. And to Senator Feinstein, man, she has been on this as well. I've been in the room with her where she's taken this on, so we really appreciate that. Mayor Faulkner, it's been really great to have you in the room with me because I'm apparently the peacemaker now, and you're the guy that hammers people to get things done, which is really, really great. And Supervisor Cox, if you want someone at the White House managing a meeting, you want Supervisor Cox. And then my colleague, Paloma Gary, was just in a meeting with a top official in Mexico who's been assigned to work on this issue 2 days ago and not taking no for an answer. So this is really great. You know, we've had a crisis situation, 50 million gallons a day in the Tijuana River since November with no end in sight. So we need to get that money appropriated and then spent as quickly as possible, hopefully as quickly as possible as it was done for the border wall. So if they could build the border wall in a week, we need to build those infrastructure diversion ponds in a week and hopefully next month. So that's what we're focused on. But it's been a team effort all the way. We have been focused, relentless. We have not taken no for an answer, but we have worked together and worked across the aisle. And I'm really proud of our San Diego team. And I'm more proud of also as our residents all throughout the region, my colleagues in Coronado at the port, Chula Vista National City, and mayors from around the region, and all the people who come up to us and say, keep going, keep moving forward, because the most important thing we can do in San Diego is have a free day at the beach, right? And with this weather, we're gonna make sure we can surf all our perfect waves and have the best days of our life at the beach. So I am grateful to this team and all of us who have helped us move this forward. And now I'd like to introduce, again, the pit bull, or maybe the white shark, because you have more white sharks in your district than any place on the planet. Mike Levin, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for coming and joining us on this spectacular San Diego morning for this great accomplishment. And with that, we'd be happy to answer a few of your questions. Yes. We're going to fight, I personally am going to fight so that all of it comes to the Tijuana River Valley. And if you look at the actual language, what the president signed into law, it specifically has Tijuana River Valley right there in the language. So we're going to fight Region 6 in Texas. I'm sure they know what just happened. They know that this is passed as well, but we're going to fight for every penny of that. And if you go back and you look historically at BWIP, we haven't gotten our fair share. Region 9 has been shortchanged, so we're going to make sure we make up for lost time, and I know everybody up here is going to fight with me to make sure that that is the case. Anybody else want to? It is.
Well, but you're saying we have to fight for it. Could you clarify that?
We just have to make sure. I'm not going to be convinced that the money is here unless I see people actually out there working to clean up the pollution. So we're not going to stop fighting. But if you look at the actual language that was signed into law by the president on Wednesday, it talks about $300 million specifically for the Tijuana River Valley. Historically, however, for BWIP projects, there's been a fight between Region 6, which is Texas, and Region 9, which is California, and we haven't always stood up and won those fights. And we're going to stand up, and we're going to make sure this money goes to where it's supposed to go. Go ahead.
Just for perspective on your question, Ed, in the 90s, Texas had problems that were like this, and we spent hundreds of millions of dollars as a country to help them, as we should. Now we have the bigger problems over here, and we think that that's justification for this. We've asked for hearings in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee to clarify direction to EPA. But you're right. I mean, the thing is, we're taking a step at a time. When I said we have more work to do, this is the work we have to do, because we weren't in a position to say, don't put $300 million in the bank for cross-border sewage until we get the language worked out. We got that money available for us, but you know, as I think we should get every penny of it, but that's the work I said we have to continue to do, and we will do. Each week we're back in Washington. Well, I think the advantage we have is Supervisor Cox may want to address that. He's been working on having projects ready to go that would solve this problem. So we have work we could do now if the money's available. We're trying to get that fast-tracked for this part of the coastline.
Yeah, in fact, that might not. That's a very good point. So I made it very clear that I wouldn't vote for this USMCA, the new NAFTA, unless this money was in for San Diego. Now, we got the best language you possibly could on the negotiations, and one of the advantages we have, and I'd like to have Greg address this, is that we've been working on specific projects here ready to go. And so if you could comment a little bit on those, because we are ready to go, Texas is not. Yeah, Greg.
Yeah, the County of San Diego has been able to get some funding through the state of California through Senator Ben Wesso. We had $500,000 to do a study of the Tijuana River Valley and look at all the different potential projects that could help resolve the sewage that's coming across from Mexico. It's not doing anything in Mexico. It's everything that's defensive action, if you will. The county has added money to that. The SB 507 was a bill that was carried in the legislature. The projects that would help stem that tide and cut down the number of cross-border transborder sewage days from about 158 days right now on average to about 12. We got together in the local delegation here and focused on a project is about $403 million. Obviously, that's more than the $300 million, but we know it's going to take a couple of years to spend that money out. So the EPA, through Mike Stoker up in San Francisco and Chad McIntosh, their assistant administrator, are going to be coming out on March 9th. We'll have another stakeholders meeting, which all of the people behind me have had representation at, to hear what they're going to propose as the best solutions. And we look forward to that meeting. We hope we get the answer we want. But as has been said, it's going to be a multi-year effort. It's not going to be built overnight, but at least I think with these studies, we'll be able to stem the tide of transborder sewage that actually has been going on for almost nine decades. I think 1931 was the first instance of transborder sewage. It's time to get it fixed, and I think with this team, we're going to do it.
And it won't
Thank
blow
you.
over like the wall did.
No.
Mr. Levin, you say you saw a window. Did the lawsuits, multiple lawsuits, now involving the state of California, did they help push this through? I understand one of them has a court date already in San Diego.
Well, I think they brought attention to this. We're going to have to work through, obviously, those lawsuits. My team is already looking into how we're going to be able to expedite these funds, given all those lawsuits that are pending. I know you've reported on it, but we're confident that working together, we're going to be able to get these funds here as quickly as we can, and we won't stop until that happens.
Would you tell the entities involved that this makes the lawsuits moot, or do they move forward? And I know you're not speaking on behalf.
Lawsuits have been stayed pending all this.
Perhaps just to give us an update on, does this make them moot, or no, they're going to move forward? And if they do, does that put a fly into all of this?
Well, I think Mayor Dedina had something you wanted to say on that.
At the request of the White House, but also the request of the White House and the Justice Department, our entities agreed to stay the lawsuits. So we've been doing that for the last few months so they could review these cases. So that's where we're at now. I mean, our goal is clean water. Before the lawsuits, this wasn't, we weren't moving the agencies forward, but to where we've gotten today is because we've had this collective, cooperative team effort that's been relentless and focused on one thing: clean beaches and clean water. So that's where we're going. That's our only objective. Our objective isn't to go to court. Our objective is to get clean water. So right now we stayed the lawsuits, and we hope we're going to get the answer that we want.
What's the current trust level in terms of Mexico achieving their end of the deal in terms of the pumping stations and the actual flow of sewage?
Well, I think we've had good discussions with them, and many of my colleagues have as well, but we now have to make sure they back up their rhetoric with the actual dollars it's going to take, which, depending on who you ask, could be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. To the extent that North American Development Bank funds are available to help with that, I think that's a really critical tool. But we've got to make sure that the folks on the Mexican side of the border understand this is their responsibility as well. We are in a good faith effort putting a lot of our federal dollars into our side of the border to help solve this problem. They've got to do the same.
I should comment a little bit on this. So if you go and take a look at the budgets of Tijuana itself, the city in Baja California, their budgets are actually quite small. The way the tax system works in Mexico, most of the money goes to Mexico City. And so then it's federal dollars that have to flow in. Now there's a mechanism under the North American Development Bank now for Tijuana and Baja California to draw these monies down. That's why they have an opportunity here. But if we were just going to rely on Tijuana and Baja California, they don't have the money. Just frankly, they do not have the money. That's why it was so important to get it in an international treaty when Mexico City was involved, because otherwise, working with Tijuana, who, again, they don't want polluted beaches either. They have their citizens in the beach. They don't want polluted beaches. But the reality is most of the money goes back to Mexico City. Now they have a mechanism to draw it down, and what we've told them is you guys have to be as aggressive as we have been on this side of the border. We've been very aggressive and, of course, worked together. You guys have to do the same thing if you're going to fix this problem, because the problem affects you guys too. Estas aguas negras no nomás corren en San Diego, también corren en Tijuana. La gente de Tijuana también está en las playas contaminadas. Entonces ellos tienen que saber que tienen que trabajar juntos para que el dinero de la Ciudad de México, el gobierno federal, pague para la solución aquí en esta ciudad, porque no lo han hecho. Like I said in Spanish, they've got to do what we did on our side of the border, because now they have a mechanism to achieve it. No. So just to clarify how the NAD Bank works, the NAD Bank works by putting in equal amounts of money. So the United States is now committed to putting in $1.5 billion. The Mexican government is now committed to putting in $1.5 billion for a total of $3 billion. The good thing, the nice thing about the NAD Bank is that it can spend money on the Mexican side. That's the big deal. Thank you.
Diversion and treatment here on the north side of the border, right? Is that still the game plan? Is everyone on the same page?
Mayor?
And then when will we see that kind of break ground? Is this money going to help us break ground on something like that?
It is, and that was part of when we all got together. We said at the beginning, we weren't interested in a partial solution or a half solution. We wanted to fix it all. And as Serge and I were saying, it does us no good to say you're going to stop the flows and only have 50 days of beach closure. Nobody was interested in that. And so why we push so hard with the EPA, and to answer the question directly, is to say we want to fix it for good. Yes, that's the solution. We need to do the design, the engineering, and all of that. And as we've said today, it's not going to happen overnight, but the commitment to fix it once and for all, I think was what is so significant about this agreement and the dollars that not only on this side, but on the Mexican side. And I can tell you, having spoken with just this week with Ambassador Barcena, Secretary Ebrard in Mexico, they want this to work. They realize how important this is. There is no stronger issue right now for environmental cooperation to solve a problem that is eminently solvable when our two countries work together than this one. And that's why we work so hard to say let's have this be the example. And that's why it's important. That's why the money's there. And I can tell you the political will is there in Washington and in Mexico City. And it's going to be up to all of us in the coming weeks and months to translate that into actual, final design and then ultimately shovels in the ground.
Okay, so if we're saying we're going to focus on the project on the north side of the border, we still got all these lawsuits on the canyon collectors. Are we thinking that some of this money could go toward expanding the canyon collectors, or is the idea that the federal government would also pay, in addition, DWIP money to expand those?
Greg, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
In places like Smuggler's Gulch, please.
When Mayor Faulkner, Mayor Dedina, Mayor Bailey, and myself, along with Gary Bonelli, who is then chair of the Port Commission, when we had a meeting back in Washington in September, we really focused on solving the problem on the U.S. side of the border. Now, you're right, there's other projects that need to be done, but we are focusing on a 163 million gallon a day sewage treatment facility to be built on the U.S. side of the border. That would cut down those transborder sewage days down to 12. The arguments we made were really fourfold of why this is such a critical priority. We all know about the environmental problems that has existed for 90 years. We know about the economic impacts of the city of Imperial Beach and Coronado to a certain extent on when they have to close down their beaches. But I think the most compelling reasons we made were, if you look over my right shoulder, there's $1 billion that the U.S. government is investing in the SEAL training facility. They can't train all the time because of sewage that comes up on the beaches. Also, the Border Patrol. They're traipsing through all sorts of bad stuff in the Tijuana River Valley. So I think it's the Border Patrol, and I think it was certainly the impact on military preparedness that has led us to this day. We hope there's going to be 163 million gallon sewage capacity announced when we meet on March 9th. But it's in the EPA's court to come back and say what they wanted us to come up with a plan. We have collectively done that. We've presented it to them. They wanted to have some time to digest that. So when they come back on March 9th, we'll find out what they're going to propose. Well, I don't know. I hope it includes a lot of things, but they've got some money now that they can start working on the project almost immediately, and we look forward to hear what their solutions are going to be, and we'll try to work with them every way we can.
Ideal,
Yes.
absolutely.
You said
Yep.
ideal. That is the ideal.
Yes.
Well, I think the meeting's going to be in Coronado. I don't have the precise time, but we can certainly make that information available to you. It's a public meeting, and it's a kind of, somebody referenced the meeting last summer. This is, I think, the third or fourth meeting that we've had with the EPA and all the players, including the Border Patrol. Well, yeah, and then Chad McIntosh, the assistant administrator, will be here also.
Okay, it's a public meeting as opposed to, look, we've got some design already in place here. And the county's already identified some money, et cetera. So tell me a bit more about March 9 in terms of what we're presenting or what the EPA's response is.
Well, we have presented to them what we think the solution is. The ball is in their court now to come back and say what they are willing to do and what they're willing to recommend. Obviously, when we last met, we didn't, I think that was in September or October, we didn't have $300 million that has been identified. The state of California, through the efforts of Senator Wesso, has $15 million that they've thrown into the pot. So, I mean, it's a matter of putting all these different pots together and coming up with the requisite amount of money to make something happen that's going to solve this problem once and for all.
Do you have a break ground idea?
Well, we'd love to break ground on March 10th, but I think we'll wait to see what EPA comes back with. And again, I think they understand the immediacy of this problem, the impact it's having on this whole community, and the military and the Border Patrol. So I think they understand the urgency of getting something done sooner rather than later.
All right. So, Rick, go ahead, Scott.
I would just say, I mean, look, this is a tremendous advance, but there's a lot of work left to do. And part of it is identifying, design and contractors for all this stuff too. That's why you may recall that the money's not $300 million today. It's $75 million a year over 4 years. This is expected to be work that goes on for a while. But the thing is, we've never been in a position to say, we've got the kind of money that's going to make a real difference. I got the kind of money that's going to help us get to the end. And that's what's good about this deal. But not that there's not a lot more work. And And I have to say that Greg has been fantastic. He's led a nationwide effort as the head of the National League of Counties, Association of Counties. Has really, he's been anticipating this moment by leading with the local elected officials an effort to get this list together of what we would do if we have the money. So we're pretty far ahead, but now we still have to go with, building these things takes a lot of time and effort. Two things we forgot to mention. One is no one thanked Nancy Pelosi. You have to know that she negotiated the final deal while Mike and I were on the plane with her back from Madrid. She's the one who stood up for this money. She takes California very seriously, and it would be remiss of us not to mention that she played a huge role in finalizing this deal. And finally, just on your lawsuits question, I think it's very professional that the lawsuits are stayed, and I think that's great by the plaintiffs. But I like the lawsuits. I like the lawsuits being out there saying, this community is serious about it. It's not our job as members of Congress to engage in that. We got to worry about our work. But we should all know, and everyone should know, and the lawsuits tell the story, that if you don't do this, we're going to be back in court because we have a right to clean water. And so I think that just because no one stood up for the lawsuits, I think they're just fine. Thank you.
Just to follow up on what Scott said, just to tell that story, hopefully the speaker won't mind my telling this story. We were on the plane from the COP25, the International UN Climate Conference. Scott and I were two of the 15 members of Congress that got to go. And I was sitting in a row behind the speaker. Scott was up in front of the speaker. He's more senior. And the speaker was negotiating. We'd had 3 straight days of meetings in Madrid, so we were all pretty tired, except the Speaker of the House, who was there line by line negotiating the final details of the USMCA, improving the USMCA, the labor, environmental, and enforceability provisions of USMCA. And she came and she kind of looked at me I was there with my 2 freshman colleagues in the back, Joe Neguse and Sean Casson. She said, $300 million for the Tijuana River Valley, is that okay? And I said, yes, Madam Speaker, that's okay. And you better go tell Scott in the front because he'll be really happy about that. So that's how that happened. Very memorable and exciting plane trip home. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more. All right, if there's nobody else, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Very good. Well done. Congressman.
Thanks, buddy. Good to see you.
Well, Mark, I really
Appreciate it. You too. You too.